Yesterday, like most days, I put my cell phone in my purse and brought it to work with me. Or so I thought. While I was walking to work, I took my phone to check the time. That's a habit of mine, to check the time at a certain point on my walk. It was 8:46. I was ahead of schedule. It was nice to be ahead of schedule. I put my phone back in my purse and went on my day. At 12:30, I went on break. I got my purse and I looked for my phone, but it was missing. It wasn't in my coat pocket either. I tried calling it, but I never heard it ring. At that point, I figured I must have dropped it when I thought that I put it back in my bag. I didn't remember hearing it hit the ground, but I figured that it might have hit a patch of grass, or maybe I left it on the bus or something. I told coworkers and my boss that I couldn't find it. I was on my break, so I went online and posted on my timeline about it. As I was walking home, I looked for it at the spot where I remember putting it in my bag, but I didn't find anything. But when I got home, it was on the floor in my room. How could it be that I checked the time on my phone while I was walking to work if it was at home on my bedroom floor all day? Did I imagine looking at my phone? Was my imagination so convincing and so seamless that I went through the trouble of looking for my phone while on break at work? I never suspected that I might not have actually looked for it at all. Like I said, I even told my coworkers and my boss and posted on Facebook about it. I truly believe that I held it in my hand and checked the time, and then lost it at some point up until the very moment that I saw it on my floor when I got home. How can this be? I'm confused and frankly slightly frightened. I very distinctly continue to remember having held it in my hand. Now I'm questioning myself and everything. Has something similar ever happened to you? Do you know anything about things like this, or what it is? I have another bizarre story dealing with a glitch that happened in my life some time ago. 8 years ago, I was 17 years old and in high school, and a friend of mine had a car, and one time we were driving to her house after school, and we hit what we later called a time portal. We had been driving down a familiar road, turned the familiar corner, and found ourselves on a different road than we expected. When we looked back, we didn't see the road that we were just driving on. It was as if we'd been driving on this side of town the whole time. But that was impossible unless we'd been imagining things. We never quite were sure what happened that day. It's not like we were fooling around or getting high in the car or something. We were just driving to our house like any other day. I need help. As the title entails, something keeps pretending to be me. When I was about 12 or 13, I went to a neighbor's house to spend the night. At about 3 or so a.m., my sister woke up and heard me screaming from a ditch next to the house on the property. The thing kept saying, "Sis, please help me. I'm stuck. Help." And so on. She didn't go because she felt very off for some reason. They called me and woke me up asking me if I was okay. Obviously, I was fine. When I turned 18, I moved in with my fiancé and his parents. One night around 8 or 9 p.m., my father-in-law swore he saw me walking into the kitchen. I was in the bedroom reading, mind you. I have always had bright, colorful hair. It could not have been anybody else. I am now 22 and living in a townhouse with my fiancé. My mother just texted me at 10 p.m. asking if I was okay because both her and my father heard me in the other room talking, even though I wasn't there. I live an hour away. I have no idea what to think or do. There have been many problems with supernatural things that have happened around me before that I've just written off. I genuinely need help. What is pretending to be me? My mom just informed me that the dogs were going nuts as well. I'll keep this short and sweet for you all. I'm very close with my best friend's family. I'm at their apartment regularly. A few years ago, they got a little tank with a bed of fish. As a running joke, they used to say that the fish played hide and seek because it would go missing for a few days, or weeks sometimes. They would completely clean this tank, drain it, and set it up for another fish, but the betta would reappear. Recently, the fish went missing. Gone. Nothing in there. Everything inspected. No fish. It's been 2 months, and they got some small goldfish to fill it up. Last week, without anybody or anything, a thumbnail-sized snail just pops and appears out of nowhere. The new joke is, it's an alchemist tank, and the betta fish is now a snail. They treat the tank like a shrine now because it breaks everything we know about reality. And it's a dumb little fish tank. So perhaps in some way or somehow the snail fell in. But where are the fish? It's not in the filter. There are no other pets in the house that could have taken it or eaten it. And it's nowhere on the ground or around its stand. We would probably smell it if it were, even if it's real small. Mom pranks are out of the question, unfortunately. Mom cries for weeks over roadkill. And the family fish, she'd take it like the loss of a child. The stepdad is a very, very serious person. And he says what's on his mind no matter how offensive to somebody else it might be. He's brutally honest. If he had found the fish dead, he would have said that it was dead and they would have bought another one. But he gets upset talking about this fish tank because he doesn't know how these fish are getting lost or what's going on. Okay, so I've never particularly considered myself a believer of the paranormal, nor am I a skeptic. I mean, I turn all the lights on to go to the toilet if I've watched a scary film or been reading some decent paranormal stories from Reddit. So I must believe at least to an extent, right? A bit of a backstory. My dad lives in the Scottish Highlands and I drive 14 hours round trip to visit as often as possible, usually about 2 to 3 times a year. I always love this journey, especially if it's by myself, as there's around 2 to 3 hours of motorway or highway followed by back roads through the mountains, through the forests, and around lochs, where I could put my music on, pretty much just switch off. For the most part, there's little to no phone signal, so I generally just download a couple of playlists before I go. I pop my phone into its holder and blindly follow the sat-nav until it loses signal. I've been doing this journey for years now, so I really have no requirements for the sat-nav, but I love to try and beat the ETA. It can also be quite handy when it has signal to let me know if there are any accidents or diversions ahead. Anyhow, on this particular journey I was coming home, I'd set off at nightfall as there's far less traffic on the overnight journey and less chance to get stuck behind holidaymakers, especially caravans. I was traveling south in January and the weather was showing me something else. My car showed an outside temperature of minus 12 degrees Celsius, or about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the snow barely stopped. It hadn't stopped since I arrived at my dad's house 4 days earlier. My wipers were on full speed, but still the snow kept piling up on my windshield, meaning I had to drive around half my usual speed. Looking down into the valleys, everything is covered in a thick white blanket and lit up by the dim glow of the overhead moon, making it possible to still make out the river weaving its way through the cracks and the deepest crevices, reflecting what little light there was. On these roads, there's nothing in terms of lighting, and what's worse is there can be quite often a large drop on either side of the road. Couple this with 3 to 4 feet of fresh snowfall and an inability to see any of the road, and you've got the potential for a lot of accidents. So I was driving and the snow had just given up, and I was focusing on the red and white reflective tape to keep on the road. Up ahead I saw the dim light tails of another car. A welcome sight, as it was the first I'd seen in over an hour. But instead of focusing on the reflective sticks, I was now focusing on the taillights of this car ahead. I couldn't quite work out what make or model it was. It was white or light gray SUV of some sort, holidaymakers. I thought this because I could make out their roof and their bike rack. They too must have ignored the warnings to not drive at night. When I sped up to try to make some ground between us, it seemed to speed up too. If I slowed down, they slowed down too. The space between us remained a constant. I decided that my headlights must be annoying, so I kept my distance, blindly following their lights whilst being mindful to try to keep my tires in the most shallow bits of snow on the road, avoiding the occasional mounds of snow that were building up. There was a bit of a time lapse, but I have no idea how much time passed as I switched off entirely, listening to my mix of 90s old school dance and the howl of the wind and the spat of the snow on my windscreen, watching the red lights ahead of me. I noticed a car ahead start to take a turn off the road and felt a sudden sense of sadness and loneliness. I was losing my travel buddy, the only other sign of human life I'd seen for the last few hours. I then realized that I had no idea where I was, which I guess isn't an issue. I know that I essentially just had to stay on the same road for 3 hours until I reached the fork up ahead, turn right, and then go on the main road and see a little roundabout. Bizarrely enough though, my sat-nav now just displayed lost GPS signal, and had me as a dot on a white background. It never did this. It had usually just downloaded enough of the routes to at least keep the map on the screen. It was then that I got this overwhelming urge to follow the car ahead. I knew that I shouldn't. I literally had no turnings I needed to make it off the road, and I really didn't recognize the road that they were taking. And the more I think about it, I never noticed the turnoff that goes down the side of the mountain like this, but maybe I just hadn't seen it before. I decided to follow it, although as I neared the turning, I started to doubt myself and thought that I should maybe stay on the road, but no matter how much I wanted to keep the wheel going straight, my hands and body wouldn't allow it, and I turned off. I didn't recognize this new road. I didn't recognize my old road when I was on there either, so it really didn't make a difference, I guess. Everything was white, everything was dark, lots of trees and the reflective sticks. If anything, it looked exactly the same, like I hadn't turned off at all. 10 to 15 minutes later, the car ahead of me started pulling away from me. Only slowly, but faster than I wanted to go in these conditions, so I just let it go ahead of me. I just let it drive off as there was nowhere to turn and nowhere to go, so I figured that I'd see it again shortly. Another 10 minutes or so had passed of driving alone, and then in the distance I spotted lights again, and this time I was catching up quickly. The lights were flashing in the dark distance. Amber, nothing. Amber, nothing. And I said, my travel buddy has got their hazard lights on and they've stopped. I decided I had to pull over and see what was wrong. As I pulled up behind my buddy, a white Audi, possibly a Q3 or Q5, I'm not sure, I noticed the amount of snow in their car. Surely far too much for them to have just stopped, and there's no tire tracks for me to pull over into. But I was 100% sure that it was the same car I'd been following. I came to a stop just as a woman in a blue coat ran to my window waving her arms. I'm not the most empathetic of people, but it didn't take much to read the relief on her face and see that she'd been crying. She had been pulled over because she had a puncture and then explained she'd been waiting there, unable to call anybody as there's no signal, and she thought she'd be having to wait there until the morning before she could leave. She had her ignition on while she was listening to music and tried to keep the DVD player running for her little one, pressing the heated C button each time it turned off until it wouldn't come back on. Her battery had died. I thought she was being a bit dramatic. It was literally only a few minutes since she'd pulled away from me, so I thought. Over 4.5 hours, that's how long she said she'd been there. Over 4.5 hours in her car with an 18-month-old child in minus 12 degrees Celsius temperature with no phone signal, food or drink, and no way to get heat inside of the car. So this wasn't the car that was in front of me for the last 2 hours, but it looked exactly the same, even down to the dark gray roof and the bike rack. Coincidence? I guess it's a big one, but that's all I could think at that time. I suddenly felt angry. Angry that the car in front of me had not stopped to help. Maybe they thought that I would. That's a bit presumptuous of them, I think. I asked her if she tried to flag them down. A look of confusion or concern spread across her face. She told me that there hadn't been a single car go past her while she'd been there, but I stopped myself from going any further on explaining my situation, that I'd been following a car that didn't exist for over 2 hours. She was scared enough from being in the snow and in the dark for the past few hours. Why scare her anymore? I jumped out of the car and looked in her car, and assisted by the light from my headlights, I saw her little one was fast asleep. I asked her if she wanted some coffee from my flask, and she said yes. I knelt down in the snow. She had already tried moving the nuts and had left the wrench on the floor next to the wheel, and it was covered in a layer of snow, and it was freezing cold. I jacked up her car, removed the tire, and replaced it with the pitiful spare saver from the boot. I pulled my car next to hers and connected the battery and instructed her to start up her car. Once it came back to life, we stood up and spoke. I asked her where she was going. She replied, Sterling, and to which I said, brilliant. I'll follow behind you, as again I thought, it's on my route. She thanked me for helping her, for talking to her and calming her down. She thanked me for the coffee and gave me a quick big hug. Quick enough to be meaningful, short enough to not overly be awkward for a stranger. She got into her car and set off. I got into my car and sat for a moment staring at the all too familiar taillights of a whitish-gray SUV with a roof box and a bike rack, lit up a smoke, and set off. I sped up, caught up with her. I slowed down and she pulled away. Her speed remained constant. I kept wondering how she hadn't seen the other car. The other car that was exactly the same as hers. I kept wondering how I knew where we were, but we did not turn off or turn on to any of the roads. As we neared civilization, I started to become aware of the tracks left by my new travel buddy, the tracks in the snow left by her tires, the tracks in the snow that I'm 99% sure were not there when I was following her, or the other her before I stopped and offered her coffee. The snow eased as we entered a town called Kilmahog. We reached a junction and she turned right. I turned right. We were now driving in sleet, wet snow that leaves a dirty gray and brownish slush on the ground, wet snow that makes seeing much harder than normal snow does. We approach the roundabout. She indicates left for the first turn. I indicate right for my last, and pull alongside her. She looked, waved goodbye, and left. After everything that happened, I stopped and thought about it, and I am truly of the belief now that someone, or rather something, took me that way, that night, diverted me from my normal routes, and made me feel as though I had no option but to follow that car, guide me to a stranded woman and her child in freezing conditions with no food, water, or heating. I'm still unsure how to explain it. I've not really thought about it too much. I don't like not being able to understand things or give them a logical explanation. It makes me feel uneasy. I certainly never thought too much about the paranormal. I've always presumed if the paranormal was real, it would present itself to me if needed. If not, I'd live in blissful ignorance, but now I don't know, and to me, that's worse than knowing. So did I follow a car for hours, with that car apparently never even existing, that took me to somebody in need who had that exact same car? Or, in some strange way, was I just hallucinating the whole thing?